5:17 local time. And the warning doesn't come from a lookout on the bridge or a nervous junior officer scanning the horizon. It comes from deep inside the ship, where the Combat Information Center glows in blue light and radar screens paint the Strait of Hormuz in cold green geometry. 3 surface contacts appear almost simultaneously, not drifting into view one at a time but materializing together like they were already coordinated before anyone noticed. They're not fishing boats, not tankers, not the usual coastal clutter that fills these waters every morning. These are warships, moving from the northeast, spread wide across the water, their tracks cutting against the normal flow of commercial shipping. At first glance, they look routine, distant enough to be ignored, slow enough not to trigger alarm. But then the first contact changes course, and within seconds the second follows, then the third. Inside the CIC, a surface warfare coordinator leans closer to his console, his voice cutting through the hum of electronics. New surface group, bearing 068, range 22 nautical miles. 3 contacts closing. The words move through the compartment fast, but nobody raises their voice, nobody shifts their posture. Because that's not how a US carrier strike group reacts, not in Hormuz. Not in one of the narrowest, most watched, most strategically critical waterways on the planet. At the center of the formation, the American aircraft carrier pushes through dark blue water like a floating city of steel and jet fuel. Her deck lights are still visible in the early morning haze. Fighter aircraft sit chained to the deck. Catapults are quiet. Deck crews move with the practiced rhythm of a ship in transit, not combat. But below the surface of routine, the ship is already changing. On the carrier's escorting destroyer, the spy radar continues sweeping the horizon, feeding contact data into the strike group network every few seconds. The 3 unknown vessels are now tagged, tracked, and measured in real time. Their speed increases from 12 knots to 16, then 18. The closest point of approach begins shrinking. On the bridge, the officer of the deck receives the first call from CIC. Bridge combat, 3 surface contacts maneuvering toward the formation. No AIS, no response to passive query. The captain steps closer to the tactical display. He doesn't ask if they're Chinese because he already knows what the cameras will show once they zoom in. Get eyes on, he says, log everything. Long-range electro-optical cameras rotate from the destroyer's mast and lock onto the lead vessel. Through the heat shimmer above the water, the first shape sharpens into view. A gray hull, angular superstructure, forward gun mount, phased array panels, a Chinese destroyer. The second vessel appears moments later, smaller but fast, likely a frigate, holding a wider angle off the carrier group's port side. The third stays farther back, not rushing, not drifting, moving like a command node watching the formation develop. 3 Chinese warships, and they are not simply passing by. At 5:19, the first bridge-to-bridge hail goes out across open frequency. Unidentified warships. This is United States Navy warship operating with carrier strike group in international waters. Maintain safe distance and state your intentions. Static answers, no call sign, no acknowledgement, no course change. The carrier continues forward. Around her, the escorts adjust slightly, almost invisibly to anyone watching from miles away. A destroyer widens to starboard. A cruiser tightens its position near the carrier's air defense umbrella. Another escort shifts aft, closing the rear quarter. It's not panic, it's geometry. Every ship in the formation knows its lane. Every radar knows its sector. Every sailor standing watch understands that the difference between pressure and collision can come down to a few degrees of rudder and a few seconds of hesitation. At 5:21, the Chinese lead ship increases speed again. Contact 1 now making 21 knots, CIC reports. Contact 2 opening lateral separation. Contact 3 holding back. The pattern is clear now. 1 vessel moving toward the carrier's starboard bow, 1 sliding toward the opposite quarter, 1 remaining behind the line watching the reaction. Not a straight intercept, a tightening shape. On the carrier's flight deck, the rhythm changes. Yellow shirts signal aircraft handlers to secure exposed equipment. Red shirts check ordnance safety zones. Damage control teams move closer to assigned stations. Nobody runs because running on a carrier deck gets people killed, but everyone moves with purpose. Below deck, doors seal. Communications narrow. The ship's internal mood shifts from transit to readiness. At 5:23, the second hail goes out. Chinese naval vessels, this is United States Navy Carrier Strike Group. Your current maneuver is unsafe. Maintain separation. This time there's a response. Short, flat, accented. U.S. carrier, change your heading. For half a second the bridge is silent. not because anyone is surprised, but because everyone understands exactly what just happened. A foreign warship has ordered a U.S. aircraft carrier to alter course in international waters. The captain keeps his eyes on the display. Negative, the communications officer transmits, United States Navy vessels are conducting lawful transit. Maintain safe distance. The Chinese ships keep coming. At 5:24, the lead contact crosses inside 18 nautical miles. Its bow remains angled toward the outer edge of the American formation. The second ship continues sliding wide, building pressure from the opposite side. The third remains steady, as if waiting to see which way the carrier will move. But the carrier does not move. She holds course. Inside the CIC, the tactical picture tightens into something nobody wants to name too early. 3 gray tracks, one massive American carrier, a narrow waterway filled with tankers, patrol craft, and commercial traffic. No missiles, no gunfire, just speed, silence, bows, and intent. The captain looks at the screen one more time. Bring the group tight, he says. Hold course. Record every second. Outside, the sun is beginning to rise over Hormuz and 3 Chinese warships are still closing. 5:26 local time. And the 3 Chinese warships are no longer just contacts on a radar screen. They're now a formation. The lead destroyer holds starboard, running almost parallel to the American carrier group, but slowly narrowing the angle. The second ship, the frigate, continues sliding wide across the port quarter, its wake bending outward before turning back in. The third remains behind the group, farther out, steady and deliberate, like a quarterback watching the field before the play develops. Inside the Combat Information Center, the geometry is obvious. They're not crossing, they're shaping. Contact 1 maintaining 21 knots, Contact 2 opening to port, Contact 3 trailing at 14 nautical miles. A tactical officer marks the tracks on the display. 3 lines are forming around the carrier strike group, not close enough to be called an attack, but too coordinated to be ignored. The carrier remains on course, and that matters. In the Strait of Hormuz, every movement carries weight. A slight turn can be read as navigation. A hard turn can be read as retreat. A sudden acceleration can be read as aggression. Out here, steel doesn't need to fire to send a message. Sometimes the message is hidden in the angle of a bow, the length of a wake, or the refusal to answer a radio call. On the bridge of the American destroyer, the captain watches the screen without moving. Don't chase their formation, he says. Protect the carrier, maintain lawful transit. The order goes out across the strike group, calm, precise, measured. A U.S. cruiser tightens its air defense position near the carrier. 1 destroyer edges forward, opening a shield ahead of the formation. Another escort holds aft, guarding the rear quarter. The carrier stays in the center, massive and steady, pushing through the morning haze like nothing in front of her could force a change. But every sailor aboard knows the situation is getting tighter. At 5:28, the lead Chinese ship closes to 12 nautical miles. The cameras have her clearly now. Gray hull, forward gun, angular mast, Chinese naval flag snapping hard in the wind. On her upper deck, personnel are visible near the railings. No weapons are manned, but the ship's posture is not passive. Then the U.S. electronic warfare team catches the next change. Bridge EW, Contact 1 has increased surface search emissions, narrow sweep, low power, not a fire control lock, not yet, but it means the Chinese ship is no longer just watching with radar, it's actively measuring the carrier group's position, speed, and heading. Every sweep adds data, every ping shows intent. The captain gives a short nod. Log it, don't respond in kind. That's the discipline of the moment. The Chinese are trying to make the Americans react. A radar escalation, a visible turn, a nervous course change, anything that could later be cut into a headline, edited into a claim, or pushed across state media as proof that the carrier had been forced away. The U.S. Navy does not give them that. At 5:29, the second radio call goes out. Chinese naval vessels, your current maneuver is unsafe. You are approaching a United States Navy carrier strike group operating in international waters. Alter course to maintain safe separation. For 5 seconds, nothing. Then the reply comes back. U.S. carrier group, you are creating unsafe conditions, change your heading. The same demand, slightly different words. Inside the CIC, nobody reacts. The communications officer looks toward the captain. The captain doesn't look away from the tactical display. Respond once. The transmission goes out clean. Negative, United States Navy vessels are conducting lawful transit. Your vessels are responsible for maintaining safe navigation. Maintain separation. Outside, The Chinese frigate on the port side changes angle again, not dramatic, just enough. Its bow turns inward by a few degrees. The wake behind it curves white against the deep blue water. It's now moving in a shape that could bring it closer to the carrier's rear quarter within minutes. Contact 2 maneuvering with intent, CIC calls, CPA decreasing. Closest point of approach, that's the number everyone cares about. Not what the ship claims, not what the radio says, not what flags are flying, just distance, speed, and time. At 5:30, the CPA for the lead Chinese destroyer drops below 6 nautical miles. The frigate's CPA drops below 7. The trailing ship remains behind, holding position like a sensor platform, watching the American formation compress. On the carrier's flight deck, the change becomes visible. An FA-18 Super Hornet is moved into alert posture. Ground crew check wheel chocks and tie-downs. A deck edge elevator remains locked. Fire crews shift closer to their stations. The ship is not launching aircraft yet, but it's preparing for the possibility that the next move might demand it. On the escort destroyer, a helicopter crew moves across the deck toward an MH-60R Seahawk. Rotors still silent, doors open, sensor operator already inside. The Seahawk is not a weapon in this moment, it's an eye, and sometimes an eye is enough. At 5:31, the lead Chinese ship turns slightly inward again. The movement is small, but on radar it's unmistakable. Captain CIC says, closest point of approach is now inside the warning threshold. The bridge goes quiet, the carrier still holds course. The Chinese ships keep closing, and the circle around the American strike group has begun to tighten. 5:32 local time, and the warning line is no longer theoretical. On the tactical display, the lead Chinese destroyer's projected path now cuts too close to the American protective screen. Not close enough to be called an attack, not close enough to justify weapons release, but close enough that every second has to be measured, recorded, and answered with precision. The carrier still holds course, and that's the center of the entire standoff. If she turns away too sharply, the Chinese formation can claim the carrier yielded. If she accelerates, the situation could spiral. If she slows, the formation behind her will compress inside one of the busiest maritime choke points on the planet. So the carrier does what carriers are built to do. She stays steady. Around her, the escorts move. One U.S. destroyer pushes slightly forward and outward, placing itself between the lead Chinese ship and the carrier's starboard bow. The move is controlled, smooth, and unmistakable. It doesn't chase, it doesn't threaten. It simply occupies the water that matters most. Inside the Combat Information Center, the surface warfare officer watches the geometry change. Screen unit is between Contact 1 and the carrier, he calls. CPA still decreasing. The captain nods once. Launch the Seahawk. On the flight deck of the escort destroyer, the MH-60R comes alive. Rotor blades begin turning slow, then faster, chopping the air into hard pulses. Deck crew crouch low, helmets down, hands signaling through the rotor wash. The helicopter lifts clean from the deck and slides out over the water, nose angled toward the Chinese formation. It's not armed for attack, it doesn't need to be. The Seahawk carries cameras, sensors, communications gear, and presence. In a standoff like this, that combination can matter more than a missile. At 5:34, the helicopter drops to 500 feet and moves ahead of the American formation, staying wide enough to avoid provocation, but close enough to make its message impossible to miss. Its forward-looking infrared sensor locks onto the lead Chinese destroyer. Heat signatures appear across the upper deck. Engine exhaust glows white. The gun mount sits forward, still in its resting arc, but now under continuous observation. The Seahawk crew transmits on open frequency. Chinese naval vessels. This is United States Navy helicopter operating with carrier strike group in international waters. Your maneuver is unsafe. Maintain safe separation immediately. No response. The Chinese destroyer holds course. At 5:35, the second Chinese vessel on the port quarter turns inward again. The move forces the American cruiser to tighten slightly toward the carrier. The strike group is now compressing by design, forming a harder protective shell around the carrier without breaking transit. Every movement is being watched from both sides. Every wake matters. Every angle matters. Then the electronic warfare console flashes. EW bridge, Contact 1 radar emission changed. Stronger sweep, still not fire control, but they're painting the formation. The captain's expression doesn't change. Log the change, no illumination. That's restraint. The American ships have the ability to answer with far more powerful radar energy. They could paint the Chinese destroyer with fire control systems and make the message brutally clear. But that would move the encounter into a different category, a sharper one, a more dangerous one. And the US Navy doesn't need to escalate to prove it's ready. At 5:36, the lead Chinese destroyer makes its most dangerous move yet. Its bow shifts another few degrees inward, small on the water, large on the screen. Inside CIC, the projected track updates instantly. The line now brings the Chinese destroyer toward the outer edge of the American destroyer's path. CPA under 4 nautical miles. The surface watch calls. Time to CPA 6 minutes. On the bridge, the captain finally gives the order everyone has been waiting for. Show them the line. The American destroyer doesn't turn toward the Chinese ship. It doesn't accelerate aggressively. It simply adjusts its heading enough to make clear that any further inward movement will put the Chinese vessel face to face with a US Navy warship, not an exposed carrier. Above the water, the Seahawk changes orbit. It crosses ahead at a safe distance, low enough for its markings to be seen, high enough to remain professional. Its camera never leaves the Chinese bridge. The sensor feed streams back in real time, time-stamped, geolocated, and stored. Then the US warning goes out again. Chinese warship, your current course creates unsafe risk of collision. Alter course immediately. For several seconds, only static answers. Then a voice comes back. US vessels are creating dangerous conditions. Change heading. The captain doesn't reply immediately. He looks at the display. The carrier remains steady. The cruiser holds port. The aft escort closes the rear quarter. The Seahawk circles. The lead destroyer stands between the carrier and the approaching Chinese bow. The formation is tight now. Tight enough to send a message, not tight enough to panic. At 5:38, the Chinese destroyer increases speed, only by 2 knots. But in Hormuz, 2 knots can change everything. Contact 1 accelerating, CIC reports. CPA now inside 3 nautical miles. The bridge goes silent again. The American destroyer's forward gun mount rotates a few degrees. Not toward the Chinese ship, not directly, just enough to be seen. No warning shot, no missile hatch, no fire control lock, only steel moving on steel. The Seahawk drops into a wider orbit and transmits one more time. Chinese warship, you are approaching an unsafe range. Alter course now. This time the Chinese ship doesn't answer. It keeps coming, and the US destroyer moves fully into the gap between them and the carrier. 5:40 local time, and the American destroyer moves into the gap. Not fast, not reckless, just enough. Her bow cuts across the water ahead of the carrier's starboard side, throwing a hard white wake into the morning sea. From above, the maneuver looks simple. One escort shifting position inside a moving formation. But inside the Combat Information Center, everyone understands what just happened. The US Navy has placed steel between the Chinese destroyer and the aircraft carrier. No missile launch, no warning shot, no shouted order, just position. And at sea position is power. Screen unit is now established between Contact 1 and the carrier, CIC reports. Carrier maintaining course, formation intact. The captain watches the tactical display. The lead Chinese warship is still closing, but its angle has changed. It's no longer approaching open water beside the carrier. It's approaching a US destroyer already waiting in the lane. That changes the entire calculation. If the Chinese ship continues inward, it will have to cut across the American destroyer's projected track. That will create a collision risk event on recorded radar, camera, and electronic logs. If it turns away, the pressure maneuver breaks. If it slows, the carrier group keeps moving through Hormuz untouched. The trap has reversed. At 5:41, the Seahawk widens its orbit overhead. The MH-60R's camera stays locked on the Chinese bridge. Every movement is captured, personnel shifting along the railings, the lead ship's bow wake shortening slightly, signal flags still secured, forward gun unmanned but visible. Its radar continues sweeping, but there's still no fire control lock. That matters. The line hasn't been crossed, but it's close. The American destroyer issues the next warning. Chinese warship. This is United States Navy warship. You are approaching at unsafe range. Alter course immediately to avoid risk of collision. Static. Then the Chinese response comes back. We are maintaining lawful navigation. US vessels are creating unsafe conditions. The American reply is immediate. Negative. You are maneuvering toward a carrier strike group, conducting lawful transit. Alter course now. The carrier doesn't slow. That's the message beneath every word. Behind the protective screen, the aircraft carrier continues forward with the same steady power. Her deck now fully alert, Super Hornets sit ready, Fire crews watch the sea. Lookouts track the Chinese ships through binoculars. The entire ship feels locked into one controlled breath. At 5:42, the Chinese destroyer reaches the critical point. Its projected track shows a CPA inside 3 nautical miles of the American destroyer. In open ocean, that distance could be managed. In Hormuz, with traffic lanes, tankers, escorts, and a carrier in formation, it's dangerous. The American destroyer sounds one long blast from her horn, a collision warning, legal, professional, impossible to ignore. The sound rolls across the water, deep and metallic, cutting through rotor noise, engine rumble, and radio static. On the Chinese ship, deck personnel turn. The bridge windows flash in the rising sun. For the first time, movement aboard the lead vessel looks less coordinated and more urgent. Contact 1 reducing speed, CIC calls. The number drops slowly, 23 knots, then 22, then 21. Not a retreat, not yet, but the pressure is bleeding out of the maneuver. The U.S. destroyer holds its line. Above, the Seahawk remains in its orbit, camera still recording. Its presence makes the moment permanent. There will be no argument later about who moved first, who closed distance, who forced the risk. The data is already saved. At 5:43, the Chinese frigate on the port quarter adjusts course outward by 4 degrees. Small movement, major effect. The arc around the carrier opens. Contact 2 opening CPA, the surface watch reports. Formation pressure decreasing. The cruiser on the port side holds position but doesn't pursue. That restraint matters as much as the maneuver itself. The goal is not to chase the Chinese ships away. The goal is to protect the carrier and keep the transit legal, controlled, and uninterrupted. The third Chinese ship remains behind, still watching, still transmitting, still outside the immediate warning zone. But the shape is broken now. The American formation has tightened at exactly the right moment, forcing the Chinese ships to choose between escalation and separation. They choose separation. At 5:44, the lead Chinese destroyer turns outward, only a few degrees at first, then more. Its bow wake shifts, the white line behind it lengthens and straightens. The projected collision risk disappears from the tactical screen. Inside CIC, nobody cheers. There's no celebration when a crisis backs away from the edge. There's only confirmation. Contact 1 opening, CPA increasing, unsafe approach broken. The captain gives a single order. Maintain screen, continue recording. The U.S. destroyer doesn't turn after the Chinese ship. It doesn't accelerate to chase. It stays between the carrier and the threat until the distance widens enough to matter. The Seahawk completes another slow orbit, its sensor package still fixed on the Chinese formation. From its camera feed, the lead ship is now clearly angling away from the carrier group. The frigate is no longer pressing the port quarter. The trailing ship has lost the geometry that made the formation dangerous. The circle has cracked. At 5:46, the carrier passes through the narrowest portion of the tactical box without changing course. That's the result. No shots fired, no collision, no retreat. The Chinese ships remain visible, still close enough to be watched, still present enough to matter, but they no longer control the movement of the American formation. The U.S. Navy has responded with what it does best under pressure: discipline, positioning, sensors, and timing. The lead Chinese destroyer expected the carrier to move. Instead, a U.S. destroyer stepped into the lane. The carrier held steady, and the entire strike group sailed forward without blinking. 5:49 local time, and the distance finally begins to open. On the tactical display, the 3 Chinese tracks no longer form a closing arc. The lead destroyer has turned outward, its projected path now moving away from the American screen. The frigate on the port quarter holds parallel for a few more minutes, then widens its track. The third ship remains farther back, still watching, still present, but no longer positioned to shape the movement of the carrier strike group. Inside the Combat Information Center, the change is measured in numbers, not emotion. Contact 1 opening, CPA increasing past 5 nautical miles. Contact 2 steady, no longer closing. Contact 3 holding aft outside warning threshold. No one relaxes, not yet. A U.S. Navy crew doesn't assume a standoff is over because the screen looks cleaner. It waits, it verifies, it records. It keeps the formation ready until distance, behavior, and time all tell the same story. The carrier remains on course. That's the point that matters most. No hard turn, no retreat, no sudden acceleration, no visible break in transit. The largest ship in the formation continues forward through Hormuz, steady and deliberate, as if the entire confrontation had been nothing more than weather passing across the sea. But everyone aboard knows better. On the flight deck, the alert posture remains in place. Super Hornets stay ready. Fire crews hold their positions. Deck personnel continue moving with controlled purpose, eyes occasionally lifting toward the horizon where gray hulls still cut across the morning light. The carrier has not flinched, the escorts have not overreacted, and the Chinese formation has failed to force a change. At 5:52, the Seahawk completes another slow orbit over the American formation. Its sensors remain locked on the lead Chinese destroyer, now moving outward with a longer wake and a less aggressive bow angle. The helicopter's camera captures everything: the widening separation, the change in heading, the reduced speed, the broken formation. Every frame is time-stamped, every coordinate is stored, every transmission has already been logged. In modern naval confrontations, the memory card can matter as much as the missile cell. Radar tracks, bridge recordings, electro-optical infrared footage, electronic emissions, and radio calls build the record of what actually happened. They show who closed distance, who ignored hails, who changed course, who held formation, who forced risk into a crowded waterway. That record is now in American hands. At 5:55, the captain receives the updated surface picture. Chinese group remains in vicinity. No immediate threat. Recommend continued monitoring. The captain doesn't leave the bridge. Maintain readiness, he says. Keep the screen tight until they're outside the box. The box is not a physical line. It's a tactical boundary drawn from range, speed, traffic, and risk. Inside it, every maneuver matters. Outside it, the formation can breathe again. The Chinese ships linger just beyond the edge. They haven't disappeared, they haven't surrendered the area, they haven't admitted anything over radio. That's never how these encounters end. At sea, especially in contested waters, nobody says they back down. They simply change course, reduce speed, widen distance, and let the wake tell the story. At 6:01, the lead Chinese destroyer is now more than 8 nautical miles off the carrier group's starboard side. The frigate has opened even farther to port. The trailing ship remains aft, but no longer holds a position that could pressure the formation. The circle is gone. The carrier strike group continues through Hormuz. Inside the CIC, watch teams begin compiling the event report. The timeline is clean. First contact, first hail, no response. Course changes, radar emissions, unsafe approach, helicopter launch, collision warning, Chinese course alteration, carrier maintained lawful transit, no shots fired, no collision, no retreat. That's the entire story in 3 lines, but the meaning is larger. 3 Chinese warships moved in close enough to test the American formation. They tried to create pressure around the carrier without crossing the line into open confrontation. They used speed, silence, formation, and ambiguity. The goal was not to sink a ship. The goal was to force a reaction. The US Navy gave them discipline instead. It didn't panic, it didn't chase, it didn't overplay its hand. The escorts tightened, the Seahawk watched. The destroyer stepped into the gap, the carrier held course, and the entire strike group kept moving. That's the kind of power that doesn't need to announce itself. At 6:08, the Seahawk returns to deck. The rotors slow. The sensor data is secured. The crew steps out into the wind, their faces calm, their work already becoming part of the ship's official record. Beyond the horizon, the Chinese ships remain visible as gray shapes against the brightening sea. Still close, still watching, but no longer controlling the moment. The carrier's wake stretches white and unbroken behind her. For the sailors on watch, the lesson is simple. In Hormuz, danger doesn't always arrive as a missile. Sometimes it arrives as a formation, a silence, a slow turn inward, and a demand over radio for an American carrier to move. And sometimes the strongest answer is to hold course. So here's the question. If you were standing on that carrier bridge watching 3 Chinese warships close around your strike group in one of the world's narrowest waterways, would you hold steady or order a harder response? Drop your answer in the comments, because out here, control is not always measured by who fires first. Sometimes it's measured by who refuses to blink.